The initial shock of cancer hit me is when I met for that 2 hour session with the the oncologist, and she explained in detail this type of cancer and how it's becoming very prominent in males that are in their 40s to 50s. I'm Larry Weber. I live in Odessa, Washington. I'm a school teacher and I used to be a coach. I was diagnosed with a head and neck cancer in 2016, December of 2016 to be exact. It was 1 week after the state championship football game that my son played in. I'll never forget the day. I was probably, maybe a bit fatigued, but I was coaching basketball at the time and teaching. And so it was just sort of my normal routine. But I had had a lump on the right side of my throat probably 2 years prior to actually getting diagnosed. I'd been to you know, my doctor in town here. Um, didn't say much, said swollen gland, no big deal. I actually went to my allergist also after that. Same type of response. I'd been having a few earaches and things, like some ear infections and things. That's why I went to my allergist doctor, and basically they just sort of didn't say much about it. So then it would have been like December 8th or so of 2016. It was the Friday after the state football game. My wife and I were in Spokane. We were Christmas shopping for the weekend, and we were staying at the Grand. And I woke up the next morning, and my lump had turned into two lumps in my neck, and I knew right away that that wasn't right. So I was able to get into Spokane ENT the following Friday, and they right away did a biopsy, and um, basically with that following Tuesday, I had had my surgery to re, remove all my glands, my lymph nodes, and different things. So they immediately knew right away that it was time to go in and take care of it. When they did the biopsy, I could see it when they extracted the fluid from it. It was like a milky color, and pretty much I could tell by the doctor. He was pretty straight faced, but I could tell that it wasn't good. And then once Monday, they got the pathology report back. He called to tell me that it was a cancerous, lymph in my lymph node, in my neck. My first reaction um, to the cancer and you're having surgery was just, let's get this taken care of. Um, and it happened, like I said, it happened really quick, like within Friday to Tuesday, and his surgery. And then I was in the hospital for a while because they removed I had my tonsils, so they removed my tonsils, and I believe it was either 13 or 14 lymph nodes that got removed from the right side of my neck. Um, and so it took a while for me to heal from that. In the Probably I'd say 5 6 days in the hospital. So it was a shock, but it was just more a let's get this started and get this out. When I first really, I don't know if you want me to jump that far ahead, but when I really started to respond and get, I guess, think about things was when I met with my oncologist for the first time. And it was a 2 hour meeting. And basically, she laid out from day one to the end and all the scenarios. And I remember my wife was with me in the room, which was great to have someone in their support. But we both immediately, when they start talking, we broke down. It was difficult to understand that I had a lot of raw emotion because I lost my father when I was 25. He died of cancer when he was 58 years old, and I I was not yet quite 50 years old. I was 49 at the time. So that's when the initial shock of cancer hit me, is when I met for that 2 hour session with the the oncologist, and she explained in detail this type of cancer and how it's becoming very prominent in males that are in their 40s to 50s. Um, and so, it hit me hard at first, but then it was over. Then I realized that, okay, let's go. They gave me about a 2 week time frame to heal from the surgery. Might have been a little longer than that. And they did the pathology on my tonsils. Well, they were hoping to find that be the source, but it was not. They could not verify it if that was the source, that it started in my tonsils. So they went back in about, I probably healed for probably 2 weeks, and then I had a second surgery where they removed my linguoid tonsils, which are in the top of your mouth. I don't know anything about them. I'm just you think your tonsils down here, but I guess there's a set that's sort of in the top of your mouth. They're called linguoid tonsils. So they also then went in and removed those. Those weren't quite as severe. The surgery wasn't quite as bad. I healed from that fairly quickly. So that's probably takes us up until the month of January of 2017. Um, and then they gave me a sort of, not an ultimatum, but a guide to start gaining weight, because of the type of treatment caused severe weight loss. So they gave me about a 2 week window to eat every hamburger and milkshake and whatever I want. So I went from about 190 to, just around 200 pounds. I gained about 10 pounds in 2 weeks or so. And then I started with chemo and radiation. My type of cancer is fairly new because of this. It's probably been around for a while, but they've just started diagnosing it more. So there was a lot of like trial drugs to help with treatment. So I chose to sign up for a trial, which sort of added time to my treatment as far as each day, not the length of it, but each day, the timing that it took. So I would go to Cancer Care Northwest every day, and I would have either a placebo or the actual medicine. It was a blind study, of course. So, and they would run that through my IV for an hour before radiation. And I had radiation 5 days a week and chemo on 1 day a week, which was like an all day treatment. So that was sort of the process that I went through. And that started around the 1st of February. So, and I had 6 weeks of radiation and 6 weeks of chemo. The chemo, I did have a few times when I got nauseated after that. Um, it was more later on, after I had to get a feeding tube put in. The radiation just sort of, the hardest part with the radiation was being strapped down, because I couldn't move because there was a head and neck. So I had this, like, I don't know, like a hockey mask type thing made out of plastic that they molded to my face, and it like strapped me down. And so not being able to move, or, almost like feel like I couldn't even swallow. And it only took, I think I timed it. It was like 7 minutes, I think. But that was a difficult part, being able to not be anxious through that, and to just relax and let it do its thing. And then, you know, um, but it did make me tired at the end of the day. And it might have been just because, I'm getting up at 6 in the morning and driving to Spokane, which is 80 miles. And the roads were, fairly nice because it was towards the end of winter, but there were a few days it was, it's a little stressful and that type of stuff. Um, so I did that for 6 weeks of radiation, and then once a week we had a chemo. And like I said, I did that trial drug, which they would run through an IV through my port um, every day prior to the radiation, and its hope was to relieve some of the sores that were created in my mouth and things like that. Um, so for the first month, uh, it was pretty tolerable. The last week was tough. I had to spend last 3 or 4 treatments in Holy Family. I got so sick and so, I don't know, dehydrated or whatever. I don't know what it was, but I spent the last 3 or 4 radiation treatments, and the last chemo treatment was in the hospital. Um, I had I probably made it 4 weeks before they put the feeding tube in, and then it became to where my mouth wouldn't allow. I mean, I could swallow water, but I could not. The sores and things in the mouth, I couldn't eat at all. Um, and so the feeding tube that was probably the worst part of the whole thing is, you know, having to put that on and try to sleep through it during the middle of the night and different things like that. But so I went from 200 pounds, and by the time I had actually got to my lowest, I was 103, 104 pounds. So I lost about 95 pounds, I think I lost. So yeah, I felt pretty weak at the end. Um, and the worst time of it was after the radiation and the treatments had quit. I felt like, oh, you made it to the end. Well, I felt worse probably the 4 to 6 weeks afterwards, as that was sort of like leaving my body, I guess. It was really a tough time during then. Um, I went, I did not work as a teacher through my treatment. And then I started teaching again probably about the first part of May. There's a lot of good things that happened because of cancer. I mean, it's changed me a lot. But there was a man that was sitting in the chair next to me, had the exact same cancer that I had. He had started his treatments 3 days prior to mine. So we were basically clones of each other. Same place, same thing, same surgery, same everything. We had the same oncologist, and we were both doing the drug, so we got to know each other. And of course, it was, we were sitting there through into March and things. So March Madness hits. We're both Gonzaga fans. We're talking basketball, and he knew that I was a coach because I was still coaching through my treatments. Um, and so to this day, him and I are still best friends. We golfed together. He worked in Spokane. He's retired now. He's like 3 or 4 years older than me. But to this day, we still call and talk to each other at least a couple times a month, and just say, I think it was God's way of telling us that we're going to make it because He put us next to each other. Because I that was the hard part, is seeing a lot of people who were going through treatment and didn't have the support that I had. I had more support than I deserved, I guess is what I should say. So it was tough, and I wouldn't wish it on my best, my best friend or my worst enemy or however you want to say it. But um, it, I made it through, and it was a life changing experience. I can tell you that. I would say it's made me I wouldn't say I was a anxious person, but it's made me slow down and appreciate all the things that I've had happen in my life, um, and not be. I won't say I was ever bitter, but I understand that I was happy to have my dad and how he molded me for as long as I did before I lost him. He died. We moved. My wife and I moved our wedding from June to April to see if he would make it, and he died a month before our wedding. So that was a really tough time in our life because he he never got to see my boys, and that was huge for me because he is the one who sort of got me interested in being a coach and a teacher. He coached little league and basketball for 35 years in Odessa, and so I sort of followed in his footsteps. But I really felt, I didn't want to say cheated, but I felt mad that he didn't get to see my boys. My youngest son Camden, who he's a crack up, and he and my dad were two peas in a pod. And I wish he would have been able to experience watching him play in the state championship game and all that kind of stuff because he loved basketball and sports and stuff. So, but it has changed me. It's made me less, anxious or upset that because it's I guess it's just made me, I don't know how to say it, but a better person. It made me appreciate things better, more. I always believed I was Christian before, but I became more faithful. I mean, I read the whole Bible through the whole thing. Um, I'm a math teacher, and on my Facebook page, I would post a math problem each day of my 30 days of treatment. So it might be like for day one, like one squared times one, whatever. And it wasn't a tough one, but just sort of a little bit of a math problem. And then I always posted a Bible verse each day. Um, and it sort of gave me something to look for the night before, keep my mind off of things. I was looking for, okay, what's the next verse I really want to show people. So, and I'm not in your face out there religious type of person, but I became more faithful in my own understanding. So, um, I would say the biggest thing though is I, I think I fell more in love with my wife than I ever had because of what she did for me. She, she was sort of the one who, probably took the tough part of it the most. I was just focused on getting through my treatments and, one day at a time, I'm going to get, but when things were tough, I think she pretty much took it all on herself. And it was tough for her. And I mean, I don't know what I'd done without her is what I'm saying. So, and that was probably the biggest blessing over the whole thing is I really understood what a great person she really was. I would say the first 18 months were it was really fresh still because my body hadn't recovered very well. I mean, it was starting to recover. I was finally starting to put a little weight back on, but they told me to eat all that ice cream. Well, heck, after I had finished my treatment, ice cream, I would try to eat ice cream or something, and it tasted horrible. One bite would be good, and then it tasted horrible. So all those types of things, to where it took me a long time to get back some of my taste and different things like that, and my desire to eat again. Being on that feeding tube really took my desire from actually even putting something in my mouth for quite a while. And so it was a good 18 months to 2 years before I actually felt like I was getting stronger and physically able to have some stamina and some energy. Um, so that was a big part of getting past that point. And then once I got past that, it was just sort of the annual, okay, we're going to go do a scan, different things like that. I still do to this day have symptoms. Like I have some issues with like some, not so much swallowing now. I mean, it took me a long time for my saliva to come back. If something doesn't feel right on your body, get it checked. I mean, I know, and I don't want to, but sometimes men are, oh, this is no big deal, right? And I knew that I had a lump, and I did go get it checked, and I just sort of took their word for it, I guess. Have that intuition of, I mean, obviously, the sooner, if it is something, the sooner you diagnose something, the better chance you're going to have to work through things. Um, the next thing I could say is, I would say it's try don't try to control what's going to happen and worry about, just, I don't know, I guess that's just sort of my mentality. I put my, one day at a time, one day at a time, one day at a time, one day at a time. Find something that allows it to become a routine, because you're going to have things that are going to pop up that are going to be difficult to deal with. So finding a routine to try to get through those things is important. Um, I think, you know I know it's not for everyone, but I think my faith was the biggest thing that helped me through the whole thing. And that was something I had to do on my own. I had to make those decisions on my own, even though my family is faithful, but it's just something I decided that I had to change and make it more of a forefront, because I really do. I think hope and faith really helped me get to where I am today.